So welcome again to this conversation. This is on open police data, the challenges and opportunities of data advocacy in this work. I have on the line with me Joyce. She's a researcher at Lane Center at Stanford. I'm going to give her some time to do an intro. It's also me, Gregory Johnson. I am the founder and executive director of Code for South Florida. We operate in 3 counties in the Florida area. We also have Janet on the line, NAC liaison and Code for Dayton. So I want to open it up a little bit before I get into intros of who we are. Janet, do you want to talk a little about like why we're here today and like why you thought this discussion would be so helpful in the network?
Yep. Thanks, Gregory. If you could just, that next slide is pretty much the whole point. The more you understand the details about the police data landscape before you start to design any kind of reform-oriented project, the better your chances are of success. So I've observed brigades all over the country delve into this arena and have to figure their way through the weeds individually. So bringing the expertise that we have here in the network together to look at this as a data issue is what this talk is about.
Thanks, Janet. And Joyce, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Greg. I work at Stanford as a researcher specializing in police reform. I'm part of a research center called the Lane Center, which does a lot of work with local and municipal governments, especially on the West Coast. And I'm also affiliated with Code for America in that I am part of a community project through Code for San Jose. So happy to talk about those experiences offline. Yeah, and thank you so much, Gregory and Janet, for inviting me to speak. Happy to talk a bit about what I know.
Thanks. And my name is Gregory. If you don't know me, again, outside of the work that I do at Code for South Florida, I also worked at Microsoft. I was also a Code for America Fellow in 2019. I've been a part of work with my brigade since 2014. And I took over leadership last year where we turned Code for Miami into a regional effort, Code for South Florida. Of course, police reform is near and deep to my heart because of what's happening today with Black Lives Matter as well as calls for police reform. And I find as a technologist or a civic technologist, we need to have more meaningful discussions about how on the ground floor we can help create more discussions around actionable items between residents and governments. Not all government leaders or staff are bad people. And there are very meaningful ways that I think that we can move discussion, and data is one way to do that. So I'm going to kick it off to you, Joyce.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Gregory. Yeah, so I think I just wanted to talk a little bit about the landscape of data sources that you can use if you are thinking about hacking or doing data analysis in the police space. Obviously, this is a super relevant topic and has been for many years, but has only recently, in the past maybe 5 to 7 years, become very mainstream. This has been a topic that has been discussed by Black communities, communities of color for many years. And I think I wanted to share some of the learnings that I have learned over my time working with police data as a data scientist and researcher, also researching a lot of the academic literature. And I think just to echo what Janet said, this is a topic of analysis or research that is particularly tricky and political and can really requires kind of responsible data use. So I think I just wanted to highlight some of the lessons that I've learned, you know, just being completely humble that I come from a background that, you know, never had much interactions with policing. And I hope I am able to share my learnings with folks who may also have had similar experiences and still want to be part of this conversation moving forward. Yes, next slide. So again, I think lots of big caution marks to notice before you go forward with this. Next slide, please. So I think the most important thing to consider first, and we're going to talk about some great examples of what it looks like to do data hacking, data analysis in policing. But the first thing to note is like, what is the objective of the project you're trying to achieve, and what scope of impact are you trying to achieve? So in particular, some things to consider are you contributing to answering a research question in academic literature, or are you developing a data set for other people to use in the public space? Or are you really trying to develop public awareness about a specific issue? The second thing to think about is really looking into the research literature behind your project. I say that as an academic and researcher, but I do think that it's really important to be knowing the landscape of the data that you are coming into, and to really understand what has already been said on the topic. What have experts done or not done, and what are gaps in the literature that you could be contributing to as a civic hacker. The third thing is to consider what the audience is for the data that you collect. So, for example, this really determines the type of access to the data that you're trying to provide. So are you creating kind of a data repository for researchers to use in different ways? Or are you trying to create a UI so that consumers or citizens can actually access the data that you're using without looking at, like raw CSVs or something? The next thing is to consider if data standards exist for the data that you're collecting, and if they don't, could you consider collaborating on this standard? The reason why I think this is super important is that right now what I've seen in the landscape of data analysis for policing is there are lots of non-standardized data sets that exist across the country, but if there was a standard across, let's say use of force data or traffic stop data, which do exist right now, you can actually be looking at data sets across cities and local governments, which is particularly important because policing happens at a local and state level, not at a federal level. The next thing to consider is, what is preventing access to the data that you are using? So, good questions to ask is who controls access to this data, as well as, what makes the data non-machine readable if that is true. And I hope that this kind of prompts you to think about why the data exists in the form that it does, and that may illuminate ways that you can also be contributing to this, to making the data more accessible. The next thing to consider is whether data analysis really is the best use of your time. So one of the things that I'll talk quickly about later is the lack of access to different open source data. And here, one thing to consider is whether you should be part of an advocacy movement that is trying to increase access to public records. So for example, are there current activist standards going on for trying to increase disciplinary records availability in your city, or trying to advocate for your city to join the Uniform Crime Reporting Database, which the FBI uses. So those are just some things to consider. And then the final thing, which I really want to stress, is that police data and analysis is not neutral. The data that we are looking at, they may just be numbers to some of us, but obviously these are important and crucial and sometimes life-changing information for many communities across the country. So we have to be respectful of the data that may represent men and women who were killed by police brutality, and just be very thoughtful about the types of judgments or conclusions that you're drawing from the data. Next slide, please. I'll just quickly skim over some of the known bugs of policing data. And Gregory, you can just click all the way to the end. That's totally fine. But one of the important things to consider is that there is a ton of reporting bias in policing data. One important thing to note is that the convener or collector of police data typically are police departments. And that means that a lot of data may be intentionally or non-intentionally not comprehensive. One really known bug in the research literature is that communities of color very seldom report crimes, do not speak up in public comment, do not come to town halls, may not respond to surveys. And so the types of voices that should matter most in these conversations typically don't get heard or do not speak up. So don't assume that your data is comprehensive just because it says that it represents, the residents in a specific city. Another really important bug to consider is because policing happens at the local level, there is a lack of standardization across definitions like crime standards. What use of force means, for example, may vary across city or state. So here, as a data analyst, you really need to check your definitions. Make sure you're comparing the right variables and you're comparing the right types of comparisons, especially with race and ethnicity, for example, if that's something you're considering. Make sure that the way that they're collecting it is relatively standardized, or else you're going to come to faulty conclusions. The last thing that I'll quickly say is that legal issues or time data validity sometimes happen with policing. So one of the things that happens a lot is that records disappear. So disciplinary records, for example, different states have time limitations for when they are made public and when they can then be taken down, depending on police union negotiations in your city or state. So really, as a data analyst, I think it's extremely responsible to archive everything that you use. Your best contribution might be to maintain data as opposed to doing analysis on it. Next slide, please. So here I just wanted to give a quick landscape, and this is, I could talk for a long time about this, but I won't. Basically, you have different types of databases that are available to you as a civic hacker, and these are some examples of open police data that I've just put here, but they range anywhere from national databases like the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Database. There are some national databases that are owned by universities or think tanks. So one great example are my colleagues at Stanford's Open Policing Project that collect data on traffic stops. And then, the next kind of column over would be citizen-created data sources. Some really good examples are Mapping Police Violence, which is a project by Campaign Zero, fatalencounters.com. It's started tracking use of force incidents in 2007, and it has just been a really great database for researchers and academics and activists across the country. There are a number of growing projects such as Police Budgets, Data Ops DC, I think is a really good one that is kind of collating information on budgets across the country. And one of the projects that we're working on in the Code 4 Bay Area region is to track police reform agendas by city councils in the Bay Area. And then on the very end of the spectrum, which is very non-standardized, typically not machine readable at all, you have open or mandatory reported data, which could exist at your local city or police department website. Typically, you just go to your city website or PD website, and they sometimes have like some data sets that are available there. Very non-standardized again. The other thing that I'll quickly say is that media archives like city, board minutes and things like that, they're not machine readable at all, but really important to consider. You can skip to the next slide, Gregory. Oh, was there one slide before this? Great. I'll just quickly show you this, and I won't go into it in detail, but basically this is an example of all the types of analyses that can be done by a police department. And I just want to say that not all cities do these things, but they have been done before. And police departments can choose to collect and analyze internal data. They can also typically share information with a third party for analyses. So, in this case, typically it's a university or some kind of think tank, or they could create kind of anonymized or aggregated data for public use. And obviously, in the civic kind of hacking space, you want your police department to be to the right as possible on this slide. So if you can contribute to any kind of advocacy places that are trying to push people or your local city towards that space, I would highly recommend it. Yeah, and on the next slide, I just have some information if you need to get in touch with me or tweet me or Slack me. I'm happy to talk more about the projects that I'm working on. Yeah, and just to collaborate in general, and happy to take questions after this.
Thank you, Joyce. So she just talked about the data, and she went into like the different type of data sets. But as civic hackers or civic technologists or public interest technologists, whatever your flavor of the name, what we like to do is, dive deep into user research and look at user needs and build prototypes and get that out to the community either through nonprofits or government. I'm going to share with you about how Code for South Florida is taking this. So this year we released our Justice Discovery Initiative, meaning we started some work that was building up for a long time. In collaboration with JSK, Stanford, Code for South Florida has also teamed up with some other local public colleges to leverage talent to work on exploring ways to use data sets, just like Joyce mentioned. So what are we doing? In terms of justice discovery, we started this thing called Justice Hacks 3 years ago, where in 6 cities like Chicago, Durham, Miami, and a few others, we explored setting up conversations through hackathon models with police departments in each of these cities and users, and brainstormed over solutions that people found. This is 3 years ago, so you can go back to ABA Justice Hack and find more information about this, but this is with the American Bar Association's Racial and Ethical Coalition. Through that, we understood user needs. We as Code for South Florida reached out to ABA Justice Hack and we asked them what they're doing with the data. And it's kind of like with most hackathons, right? It's like you come up with this idea, it sits somewhere, it's on GitHub, but what is it being used for? We decided to uncover that. We pitched for some funding and we're able to do some exploratory ways of like looking at using those existing ideas and building on those. Through that, we uncovered this concept called Badge Watch. We then took that feedback and then we did some user research and we're able to access and get more data. And when we say data, I'm talking about police complaints data, so disciplinary data, and I'm going to share with you like how that process is. Through this process, we looked at how Code for America's methodology around delivering services, and we looked at it from the policy level, we looked at the operations level, and we then looked at it from the user needs and digital service delivery model. So instead of just building something for the sake of it, we're trying to look at something that kind of touched on all these points that could be a civic tech project that was open source that can be reused in different cities. What we did is we looked at public disciplinary data. And we looked at officer name, we looked at badge number. We actually teamed up with a local journalist here who was just in his spare time building this like Excel database because the current data that existed was okay, but it didn't really connect with a lot of reports of police misconduct or police incidents with residents, and it wasn't easy to find. So we looked at that data and we decided to do something about it. Through our user research team, we did some mock-ups. We went through the whole design process, paper to digital, and we came up with a lot of interesting solutions. We also did a deep dive of what disciplinary data looks like at the national scale. So most of this data is confidential in 23 states. It's limited in 15 states, but it's public in 12 states. Guess where one of the states are? In Florida. So we looked at that and we said, okay, maybe we can do something with this data to make it easier for people to find information about their local police. That's when we thought of this project called Badge Watch. With the local journalist, what we did is we took that data and he had sifted through it and we looked at an initiative that was pressing to Miami. In Miami, in the city, we have something called the Civilian Investigative Panel. The Civilian Investigative Panel is basically where police complaints go to, and there's actually like staff that looks at the complaint, brings the resident in, brings the cop in, and then they kind of like go through a whole like, was this justified, was it not? But it's all on public record. Here's the challenge. Even though the data is public record, it doesn't always connect, and it isn't easy for people to search by police name, badge number, or even seeing that PDF report of what happened. We made it easier through this tool. Badge Watch In its first week, got over 800 plus people using the tool. In 3 weeks, we got 3,000 plus people using the tool. 50% of this, or around 50%, were returning users. And we even had about 50 or 60 of those that were actually police. We could tell because we were looking at emails, and most police use their email to access it. Through this initiative, we uncovered a lot of feedback. We reached out to many people and asked them what they thought about this tool, and many of them loved it. It was an easy way to access data. Although we only had about 150 data points, people loved the tool. People tweeted about it. News covered this. And through that effort, we got in touch with the civilian investigative panel with the staff that leads it. We then made a public data request to see if we can get more data. And they were happy to share 5 years worth of data with us. The challenge today is the data is still limited. Through the work that we did of sifting through and making sure that the data could be clean and usable, we're able to make it searchable and easy for people to use. But through a current data set, there's still some things that we need to work on to make it as easy and as useful for our end users. So what's next? Right now we're working on reviewing this and making sure that we can add that data into BadgeWatch. We're also looking at bigger fish to fry. So in the city of Miami, the Civil Investigative Panel is actually looking to expand. The commissioners approved this at the county level, meaning that this same panel will be on the county level and they'll be doing similar things. How can we prepare in the city of Miami as well as for Miami-Dade County to make tools like BadgeWatch continue to be usable, maintained, and sustained? We started to look at that and explore that as a community and organization. So Code for South is a nonprofit. We have 7 paid staff, and we decided to look at ways to explore data advocacy to inspire change in local communities. One of the things you probably know about is the call for police reform. But what does that mean? Or police defunding. But what does that really mean? We looked at open police budget data. And the reason we looked at that is because we recognize many cities have their budgets open, and you can see how much police departments are getting funded. We then began to do some user research. How many people in our community actually knew about where this budget data was? How many people could actually understand what this budget data was? In our research, we recognized that most people said that no, it wasn't, they didn't know about their budget data in the department or the local or county. They also would be interested in testing a service that makes it easy for them to understand how the budget is being spent. They were also facing kind of like a mix of challenges of like how difficult it was to understand the proposed budget. And most of these people came from Miami-Dade County. That's when we came with the hypothesis. What if we can make it easier for people to make collaborative community decisions in Miami, Florida, using a method called participatory budgeting? Participatory budgeting started in Brazil, and it was a tool used to kind of instill this trust between the people and government. Why does this matter to police reform? Well, if you want to create police reform and police defunding or more funding, depending on whichever place you stand in, you have to help people get in the room of where these decisions are being taken place. More importantly, you have to help them understand how these decisions are impacting them. If we make it easy for people to understand like how initiatives like Civilian Investigative Panel are creating open data, which then make it easier for them to use tools like BadgeWatch or search for police complaints, they then understand the value of the decisions that they have to make if they want to push different things in their community. Where are we today with this? We're not working in silos. We work closely with the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County. Through this initiative for the participatory budget solution, we approached the city of Miami. We got buy-in from the city of Miami's strategy team as well as the senior data fellow. Last week, we got buy-in from the city of Miami's budget director that they want to continue and explore ways to bring this tool forward. And they wanted to work with us in the next budget cycle, which is next year, to see if we can bring our idea from prototype to pilot. If you're interested in learning more about what we're doing, you can kind of check us out at Code for South Florida. You can go on our Slack channel and go to Justice Discovery, join the conversation. We're working closely with a lot of interesting people and research universities. You can also find me at Greg at Code for South, and you can find more information in the discourse. Now, I know we're probably at 1 minute of time, but I do want to open it up to see if we can take a question, if will permit.
Yeah, that's fine. We've got probably time for one or maybe two quick ones.
Hi, could I ask, so one thing I've realized about the criminal justice system, it's a building. The police guard the door and get people in and out of the door. The court is the top floor, but the building is 33 stories tall and 32 floors of it are actually run by the district attorney, who has huge prosecutorial discretion, investigatory discretion, almost no oversight at all. How, you know, in the mix of this, how can we think about that? I mean, a lot of data is hard to get, but theoretically open. A lot of what the DA does, not even theoretically open, it's gone. And you get to make one choice: vote for person A, vote for person B, nothing else. How do we think about this?
So that's an interesting point. I could talk on that briefly. In the city of Miami, we have a district attorney that has a history of always defending cops, no matter what. Like they've been in power for only about like 20 plus years, and it's like, what's the question of like, how do we get this? We don't have an answer to that. What we do have an answer to is working better with citizens and residents to understand the power that they do have. Like you said, some of these barriers seem like it's hard to break through. For us, it's more about the approach of like, how can we empower people where we are, and then leverage them to kind of like take the Code for America model, build a service that's so good it inspires change, help others do it for themselves, and hopefully we can build a movement that one day we can get more access to that. But on the political level, I don't know how we can answer that.
I think, just to add in, I think there's also I think the freedom of information requests, as well as requests for public records, I think is something that can be done by brigades like Code for America, wherever you are. It's an extremely arduous process and takes a lot of time. But I think that's what I was trying to say in my tip about doing data analysis. Sometimes it's not about the data analysis, it's creating that data in the first place and making it available and archivable. And so I think that if that is something that you can push for, if there are already organizations in your region or city that are working towards that, I think it makes a lot of sense to try and partner with them in some way.
Well, Joyce, I'm in San Jose too, so I'll probably end up talking to you about this later.
Yes, I saw. Great.
Do you have one more quick question?
I think we do need to wrap. Actually, I need to open the room for the next panel. But thank you both for sharing your work on this. And as folks can see on the slide here, there's a couple of Slack channels, both at Code for South and Code for America. So I encourage folks to continue to engage there. Up next, we have a Skillshare on community design workshops. So I hope to see you there.